Welcome to Leeway 10 Pod, Series 2. My name is Luke Hereford. I'm an associate artist for Leeway Productions, and alongside some special guests, I will be hosting this series. I am joined once again by my favourite partner in podcasting crime. It's Leeway's very own artistic director, Angharad Lee. How are you, Angharad?
I'm fine, Luke. Plodding on, as we always say. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
We're going into an R&D. We'll be in a real room with real humans next week. So I'm very excited about that.
That is super exciting. That's the dream right now, isn't it?
It is.
So you'll be living the dream.
Yeah, quite anxious about it though. Just to get those creative juices going again. And do I remember how to do my job more than anything?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll figure it out sort of halfway through the week, which may be too late by then, but
Thanks.
in today's episode, we will be discussing the different pathways into musical theatre in Wales. This is quite an exciting one for me on a personal note, because I think education for musical theatre in Wales is certainly growing. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts, Angharad? Why did you want to kind of cover this subject, this series?
Just, I think, because exactly that, it's growing, it's evolving, and I just think we as an industry need to keep conversing with each other. The landscape is changing so dramatically at the moment because of COVID, and I just think there's a really exciting opportunity here for all the factions who are dealing with musical theatre to come together and converse, and we need to get better at that, I think, in Wales.
Absolutely. Seems like a good segue into introducing our guests.
Yeah, so today's first guest is Eilir Owen-Griffiths. Eilir is a senior lecturer and course director for a number of performing arts programmes within the University of Wales Trinity St David, including BR Perfformio, a unique Welsh medium programme, and the BA and MA musical theatre courses. Studying a BA at Coleg y Drindod and MA composition at Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, Eilir was the MD for Llangollen International Musical Eisteddfod between 2011 and 2017. He is a composer and conductor of award-winning choir Cor Ecefin.
We are also joined today by Vivien, the head of musical theatre at Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama. Vivien established the MA Musical Theatre programme in 2011 after a successful and varied career performing in musical theatre. She trained at Welsh College of Music and Drama and the Royal Academy of Music, and she has also written the undergraduate BA Hons Musical Theatre programme for Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, which launches in September 2021. Passionate about comprehensive training for the contemporary and changing musical theatre industry, she's held the position of external examiner for musical theatre programmes at several UK institutions, as well as being convener for degree programme reviews at Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. Vivien is also a patron of Together We Stand UK, a new organisation supporting victims of abuse within the arts. And in 2020, she was awarded the ARAM Associateship of the Royal Academy of Music. We're thrilled to have both Eilir and Vivien joining us today. Welcome, both of you.
Hello, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. How lovely. It's my first podcast.
Yes, and mine.
Oh, great. Lovely. How exciting. First time for everything. Did you enjoy those introductions?
I did. I probably, give it another opportunity. I might go back and edit mine. I think it was a bit wordy.
and I think mine was too short, but there we are.
Oh, hey, so I've got a big question to start us off with. So I'm wondering what you think makes Wales specifically a crucial training ground for musical theatre at the moment.
Oh, well, that's definitely a really big question for all of us who are in Wales. And I think, it's worth saying that we've still got a lot to do in discovering where those answers are. For me, I think there's such a strong, in Wales, Eisteddfod tradition. There is a tradition of Welsh and Welsh language musical theatre as well. The Welsh language schools and the culture within Welsh schools does sort of promote that. And there is a huge appetite for musical theatre training throughout the UK. So why not Wales, with that culture behind us? I know that there's a huge Welsh contingent, a visible Welsh contingent in professional musical theatre. You can go from sort of John Owen Jones through to Caroline Sheen, Connie Fisher, Sophie Evans. There's lots of role models there. And I think what's happened in the past is that people have thought that London, because of the number of theatres that are in London, that London is the place to train. So I think, in the past we've lost quite a few potential people to London. So yes, there's a lot to sort of unpick there, really. But there's lots of initiatives for the generation of new musical theatre from in Wales, which some of the panel will know about. So which is sort of set to continue that spearheading of employment opportunities in and for Wales. So I think, we're going to see hopefully some increased programming of Welsh writing for musical theatre. I mean, you can see a little bit happening at Wales Millennium Centre, for example. And there's smaller enterprises and venues in Wales. And, other initiatives that are sort of currently being sort of touring regional Welsh venues. But I think there's a lot there that's sort of bubbling away in different pots that needs to kind of be brought together in a more joined up conversation.
I think with the Welsh language, Viv picked up on there with the Welsh language schools, and I think every youngster that's been through any of the Welsh medium schools, they tend to do a production at Christmas time or at Easter time, and there's always this sort of buzz about a musical theatre production within the Welsh schools, and I think you mentioned the appetite, and then of course that feeds into, of course, the Eisteddfod, and of course as the Eisteddfod moves from location to location, there's always an opportunity for young people to go into large-scale productions within the Eisteddfod circuit. And I think that's when it sort of is embedded. And of course, you can't go to any Eisteddfod without in out Sioeger a solo out of a musical as one of the competitions that so many people look forward to. And I think that's embedded into the youngsters, and that's why they see musical theatre as something to go for, to aim for. And as we've said also with the London-based, the idea of going to London to study musical theatre, but of course, I think that there's opportunities for young people to study musical theatre, but they not necessarily have to go over the border, if you like, to study. And I think that's what we need to embed is the idea of Wales to create its own musical theatre. And I think that what this conversation sort of starts today, in a way, is an opportunity to see where collaboration is possible, and the universities and the colleges working together with centres like Canolfan Millennium Cymru, like Theatr Clwyd, Pontio, and the Art Centre in Aberystwyth. All these wonderful venues that then can host so much fantastic things. Because seeing how wonderful the Theatr Clwyd has been working over the lockdown period is fantastic, and the Norg, of course, as well. I just think there's so many opportunities, and maybe it's during this COVID time is the time to reflect on what we have and what we could achieve. And I think our students then will benefit from all those wonderful collaborations that can be brought forward. So I think it's a very healthy time and a healthy opportunity wise for young people looking to going into musical theatre.
Yeah, it's interesting that you both brought up the Eisteddfod and that tradition. I'm just wondering, which is so essential to us, I just wonder whether having the Eisteddfod has been a challenge in how we perceive musical theatre, and just, because it's been a competition, or it's been something that you do in the Eisteddfod and for the Eisteddfod. This isn't a negative comment at all. I'm just wondering if how do we overcome that challenge?
I mean, I think for me, I would say that really possibly the aims of the Eisteddfod and, musical theatre training are slightly different. The Eisteddfod is very sort of presentational, as you correctly mentioned. It brings in the element of competition, which brings a kind of different energy maybe into the room, although it's very collaborative and celebratory. I think the real business of telling difficult stories is one that maybe isn't as palatable to, you know, the Eisteddfod tradition. I could be wrong. I don't have as much direct experience of it, not being a first language Welsh speaker, but I do think it's moving on from that, you know, that initial interest that is sparked in the repertoire, sparked in, you know, being able to perform and communicate with an audience and using your talents to do that, and then maybe moving into a slightly different area, which is maybe a little bit more in depth and difficult in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree there, and there's two things there as well that to consider is where our traditional musical theatre in Wales come from, and it is the basis of Cwmni Theatr Maldwyn, which tend to concentrate on quite historical events of Wales, and the Mabinogi and Merched Beca and all these sort of quite old-fashioned in a way look back at Wales instead of looking forward. And I think that's where it's so interesting when the competition element comes, that there's so many translations that are used. And I know that the Eisteddfod is trying to develop that. And I think, Angharad, maybe you're involved in that, in the idea of presenting competitions where we're looking at having that one of the pieces have to be by a Welsh composer or from an actual Welsh musical. And to be interesting then with translations, because there's a tendency then to go for the more contemporary musical theatre pieces and do them in
Translated from English.
in Welsh.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting conversation there to be had about what is the stuff that's readily available in the Welsh language for people to perform. And then, but the other thing we have to think about is the fringe element of the Eisteddfod as well. If you think the way that the Eisteddfod has developed over the last few years is it's gone more festival based,
Yeah.
and I think what's happening on the outskirts in the different theatre tents and the Theatre Genedlaethol is doing, that's opening doors to more interesting and more challenging subjects. But when will we see those being featured on the main stage? I do not know.
I agree with Eilir, and I think, you know, what I do understand about the Eisteddfod is, you know, the proliferation of translations of contemporary musical theatre pieces which exist in English, and I think it would be very interesting to see, you know, to help to support the generation of new Welsh musical theatre. And so I think that's very important, because that's the lifeblood then, isn't it, of the future of what we do in Wales and for Wales.
Something that you both brought up as well was this idea of being London focused. And Viv, you said something really interesting about how we lose a lot of people to London in terms of their training. And, you know, we've kind of already addressed that maybe we are starting to move away from that. But how are we starting to move away? And what's kind of changing the industry that makes training outside of London, I guess, more of an option for people?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, really. I think people are becoming more aware of, well, partly the expense and the congestion or the difficulties maybe that living in London can bring. I think people are becoming a bit more aware of the sort of availability of training options, and that's at FE and HE level. You know, in the last couple of months, I've been doing lots of meetings with potential feeder institutions, you know, which have been, you know, in Scotland and in Brighton and in Liverpool. There's lots of places that are interested in helping their students to go on to the next level into studying musical theatre at higher education level. So I think people are becoming more aware. And I think, you know, with COVID, possibly with Brexit, or although maybe to a lesser extent, people are happier to stay at home. I think there's a big move. People are celebrating home and kinship and togetherness much more. And with that becomes more of an environment where we can celebrate locality and culture in a different way, rather than the globalization pandemic, if you like, of the last sort of 10, 20 years. So I think things are becoming a bit more local. So people are finding out what's available locally. I think the big change of the industry, people know that they might have to train differently. People are a bit nervous about moving away from home, potentially because of COVID, and they know that they need a really lateral, a really wide skills based for potentially in a few years a very different industry coming out. Are we going to see the end of, not the end, but a significant reduction in the huge sort of end of pros, big main house productions? Are we going to see more community and online platforms? I think people are beginning to ask those questions about who are we making the work for, who are the audiences, and so that's facilitating lots of really interesting arts conversations. We've certainly had no decrease in our applications. We have a new course opening in September, which you know about, which has an astonishingly high number of applications, which we were really, pleasantly surprised to see. And I think people are looking for distinctive and creative ways in which to study musical theatre, so things that bring in other things rather than directing them straight to the factory of the West End.
We're starting to see in Wales more homegrown work. So if people can train at home and then work towards being in something perhaps like a new musical at the Millennium Centre, either on the main stage or in a studio environment, it just seems like the landscape is changing, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think, I think quite a lot of the time the more interesting challenges happen in the more esoteric places. I've done lots of workshop work as a performer myself, which is a great place to exercise your craft, I suppose, and you're working directly with creatives, so you're contributing collaboratively to creative futures, and I think that's very important. So if we can embed that in training, embed those skills into training, the whole culture of musical theatre might start to look different.
Eilir, how? Because I work obviously with you, and the course is quite a lot. I've witnessed the huge shifts that you've had to do so incredibly quickly and incredibly well. The teaching online, blended learning. But beyond that, I'm just wondering, what will you retain from this time? Are there elements that you've had to bring in that you think you retain in the training?
Well, I think thinking of what Viv was saying there, I think the world is much smaller now because we're much more connected, and I think that thinking of the benefits of what happened, what we had to do so quickly, as in we, I just remember March the 23rd, and we knew that we had a musical to put on. It was in I'd been writing a musical to be performed live, and then we had to switch then. And then within, what was it, 3 months, we went from having a blank piece of paper to actually writing a full set of 15 songs for a lovely group of students, and then but have to move very quickly and create something. And I think that those students coming out of the course last year, from doing that process, and basically they had no option, because other groups had options to delay or to defer, but this particular group had to, because they were going on to study, and I think some of them came over to the Welsh College, to you, to study the MA, Viv. But what was amazing is how the students had to change and had to work very, very quickly, and I think that having that platform, that online platform, as well as the live platform, has made a world of difference. And I think that that's a direction, that things that I would like to keep, and look that we do look at the digital world. We don't all of a sudden, when COVID allows us to do so, that we don't just go back to our normal way of working. And I think that because the world is so small now, with the connections and the additional network that we've managed to develop during these times, I think that things are going to be very, very different. And creating work, I think that what it's taught a lot of the students as well, and what we've been able to guide them more with, is creating their own work, and the importance of being self-sufficient as well, because of course they've had to do a lot more in their bedrooms. They've had to do more of upskilling themselves very, very quickly, and I think those skills are things that are going to be perfect for them for the future. And the students, I think, that we will be seeing on our stages in in 3-5 years' time are the people that worked really hard through this time and learned new ways of working. And I think those are the students that are going to succeed in the very challenging industry. So I think that there's a lot of pluses, I think, that the students and the staff at this time, maybe we don't realize it now because we're right in the middle of it. But I think there's a lot of benefits that'll come out of this that will create a completely different form of musical theatre going forward.
Yeah, it's great that you've touched upon the creation of work. It leads nicely to the next question. So at UWTSD, you're offering training in both English and Welsh language. So I guess with more Welsh language graduates who have specific MT training kind of coming into the industry, do you think that this will feed the future Welsh MT works?
I think it generally will, and I think that's the emphasis, and that's the specific. If you think of the BR Perfformio course in particular, is that the element of performing is there, but also the element of creating their own work is quite a part of the degree as well, and I think that's really healthy, because I think that especially coming out of COVID, as in the big theatres. That goal I don't think is there. I think that people need to think of coming out of university and college and developing their own work and being able to do that and have the skill set to do that is really important. And I think the Welsh language in particular, I think again, it's a time of reflection as well, as in where are our musical theatre composers? There's the work that you're doing with your 10-minute musicals is fantastic, but where is the platform for them to then develop even further? And I think that's really, really, really important that we have. And also, if you just think of television at the moment in Wales, that we've got so many pieces of work being done bilingually, and I think maybe that's an area we could explore, is in the world of theatre as well, to have productions in Welsh and English, the same work being produced, because I think there's opportunities there, because of course Hinterland and Un Bore Mercher, what's that in English? Hope, is it Hope? Those programs are obviously working and tapping into a much wider audience for Welsh writers and Welsh actors. Could we be looking at the same kind of thing in Wales with some of the theatre work that we're doing, is that there is an opportunity for bilingualism. And then, of course, the opportunities then for people that have stayed and studied in Wales that can use both languages, the opportunity is even greater. That's just my thoughts, really.
That kind of idea of coming out of training and thinking more about oneself as a creator or a kind of a more all-inclusive artist kind of actually leads me on to this next question, because I trained on the MA Musical Theatre programme at Welsh College. Do you remember me, Viv? It was many years ago now.
I do remember you. Absolutely, I do. Yes.
How could you forget? C'est moi, indeed. And I guess my experience of the course was that we weren't necessarily encouraged to fit into one specific route into the industry. And it meant that pretty much as soon as I graduated, I was able to start directing work, even though I didn't have experience of directing and my training was as a performer. So do you think that that's quite uncommon? Because I certainly found at the time that was a unique experience of acting training.
Well, I absolutely do remember you. I think it'd be a long time before I forget you. All for good reasons. I take that as a compliment of the training, because we're able to train. We have quite small cohorts, so we are able to train individuals. When I was writing this new BA programme, I consulted with a lot of other musical theatre UK institutions to say, what do I need? What do I need? And I went and spoke to lots of agents, casting directors, did a lot of sort of that research. And quite a few people said, well, all musical theatre training is the same. And I was not satisfied with that. I thought it can't be, it can't be all musical theatre training is the same. Otherwise, what's the difference? You wear a different T-shirt it just didn't seem satisfying at all. And I think what's interesting, Welsh College actors tend to be known for their individuality, maybe quirkiness, and the fact that they are, multi-skilled, they are well-rounded, they're professionally trained, they know how to do the job, and crucially, they're people that other actors and employers want to work with. So we started off with that sort of ethos, which meant we were able to keep the cohort small, which gives you kind of the breadth of time with the students, really, to understand how they tick. But it is very much a two-way process. I mean, you came exceptionally well read, you know a lot about the subjects, lots of subjects. So I didn't realise we were training a director at all, but I think it's very interesting to know that you felt the training was broad enough based to enable you to step virtually into directing. I do think that approach to training is still uncommon. But I think we are getting better at encouraging different pathways. Sometimes you see that more formalised in some courses where they say this is an actor muso pathway, or this is the actor singer pathway, or this is the dancer pathway. But I'm not doing that currently. But I think there's new courses popping up, and I think that allows for inclusion of new course elements which can reflect industry changes. So really, I've written the course that I've written now to reflect the current industry, really. So from there, you might get your actor musos, your creative practitioners, these collaborative contributors. And I think that's the old model, really, versus the new model, which is going to be high support and high expectation, but across a lateral skill set. And so you allow then the room for sort of self-expression with things like repertoire, with maybe bringing in other skills to musical theatre. So, the actors that we train hopefully develop, a bit more autonomy as creative beings rather than just interpreters, as the old school musical theatre model would have you train as.
Yeah, I think it's great that as well that we've got these two BA musical theatre courses now that are going to sit side by side. And just a challenge to both of you, I guess, is how do we stop this becoming a competition between courses? Because if I was 18 and I had these choices, that would be so exciting. So how do we collaborate?
There's going to be a fantastic pool of young people with a common interest within the capital city, working through Welsh, working through English. I think that if there were opportunities to work together to champion, and this is the key now, is to champion our creative as well, because I think that if we are training up performers, then those performers should be raising the flag for Welsh composers, writers, so that if there's an opportunity to work together for that aim, I think that's where both of us really should be working, so that we are supporting our own creative people as well, because I think there's so much opportunity there, and then have the individuality also, that it doesn't become a competition, that it becomes a mutual respect, and I think that's where we'll grow, and grow side by side. I think that there's only benefits that'll come out of an addition, a bigger pool of like-minded people in the same place.
I think that's absolutely true. I don't think there's any, I think the idea of competition as a negative force, I think we both, coexist. Each institution has a different vibe, doesn't it? And will appeal to different people. But certainly, judging by application numbers, there isn't any shortage. So I don't think there'd be competition in that way. And I think absolutely, I think there's lots of areas in which we can find collaboration. And I'd also like to say that the healthy respect already exists.
I was just provoking. That's all.
She's good at that.
So building on what you've both said about kind of raising the bar, raising the profile of creatives in Wales, how do we now show that musical theatre exists beyond the West End? You're perfectly placed to do that as institutions.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the earlier question. So, historically, musical theatre has been based in London due to the number of theatres, but it has never been exclusively populated by Londoners. People have come from regions all over the UK, and as we know, from our amazing theatrical culture in Wales. I think lots of performers are as keen to work at home as well as away from home, and certainly post-COVID, that's going to be the case even more. And I don't think necessarily London is always the central point of theatre, because of there's a very, very successful touring circuit, UK touring circuit, which Wales is part of. With the big tours that open at WMC, for example. I mean, London as a centre, at any given time, there'd be 25 musicals on every night in London. So there's a huge revenue there, and all of the, associated industries there. But at the moment, just to do the facts and figures bit, there is a 97% slump, and that's in the 2.7 billion a year revenue.
Wow.
34 million people visit London theatres a year. So why can't we have a little slice of that revenue brought to Wales and the associated industries, with the restaurants and the hotels and the taxis and the ice creams and the merchandising coming into the Wales pot? I think, and there's a programming question to be answered there, isn't there? And I think we can get better at that.
It's interesting you saying that. I think from where I'm sitting, the perspective is the challenge now we have as an industry is gaining the trust of our audiences again. And I think the way we're going to do that is in our local theatres, in our local rugby clubs, so how do we train? And I'm not saying they haven't got these aspirations, but how do we encourage young people to see that performing a musical in a rugby club is absolutely a success story?
I think we just provide opportunities for them to do it, and then have some kind of feedback circle where they can assess the impact. So it's not just benefiting the performer who gets to do the performance, and isn't that lovely? Because, that's the vain part of it, isn't it? But I think if we can really evaluate the impact to communities, then people will really understand that it is a viable, performance is communication and performance is catharsis, and it enables people to, articulate things for themselves. So it's very, very valuable in times of societal struggle, like we would see, the clubs in Berlin in the Second World War, for example, they flourished. Why not have that kind of culture now? Why not make it smaller? Why not make it really meaningful? And I think that's a really important word, make meaningful performance, which isn't just centred around revenue and commercial targets.
Thank you so much for joining us, both Eilir and Viv. But before we say goodbye to you, very big question, but what do you each think is next for Welsh musical theatre?
How everything evolves with COVID, I generally think there is massive opportunities to generate more musical theatre pieces of a larger scale, so that everybody can enjoy the music and the stories of Wales.
I think that's all really important. I also wanted to go back to Eilir's point earlier on of perhaps bilingual, in the way that, those television programmes have been streamed, both in the English language and the Welsh language. I think that's incredibly useful, and also really useful for Welsh learners, not just people who are fluent in Welsh. So I think there's another angle to that as well. I think it's creating the spaces where Welsh musical theatre can happen, and just embedding and encouraging a respect for that and for new Welsh musical theatre, as well as all of that historical storytelling, which of course is so important culturally, but actually making it something, so it's not just about Wales and Welsh stories, it's just about stories that happen to be about people that happen to be in the Welsh language. So I don't think necessarily the subject matter always has to be Welsh centric, if you see what I mean. And I think, that way there'll be a really much more forward thinking, almost future-proofed Welsh musical theatre industry beginning to grow.
I'm just interested from your perspective how we get audiences back into the regional theatres to support the smaller scale musicals, because they will flock from the valleys down to see, your Les Mises and your Phantoms. But if you put something a little bit more specific in regional theatres, sometimes it's a challenge. So, any thoughts on that?
I think there's always a suspicion with new work. I think there always is. It depends on, the programming of a certain venue. If a certain venue does mainstream tours and then all of a sudden does something a little bit more left field, I think that's a different audience base. So I think it's possibly about marketing and not marketing to that same mainstream main house audience. I think it's finding out where your student audience is, where your Welsh learner audiences are, where your Welsh speakers are, where your people interested in Welsh culture are, and specifically perhaps targeting that.
I think, Angharad, there's a dialogue to be had there with how Theatr Genedlaethol evolves over the coming years, especially for Welsh medium musical theatre. I think that it'd be really interesting to see how they programme going forward, and I think they possibly have a duty to do more maybe in musical theatre as well as straight theatre, if you like, but also National Theatre Wales. It's using their network to support new writing and see if we can engage in that particular way.
Thank you for listening to Leeway 10 Pod Series 2. You can stay up to date on all of our news on Twitter at LeewayProds and by using the hashtag Leeway10Pod. You can also view captioned versions of all of our episodes on our YouTube channel.